Let's now shift our attention to what is happening in Pakistan. Remember, it's been a day of drama yesterday where Imran Khan, it appeared, tried pretty much everything in and outside of the book to see if he could hang on to power. But now he's become the first Prime Minister in Pakistan to have been unseated through a vote of no confidence. So the clock struck an hour past midnight. 174 members of the National Assembly voted in favour of the motion in the House of 342 members. The opposition managed to get 174 votes to unseat the government. PMLN's Ayaz Sadiq chaired the latter part of the session, so he could not cast his vote, while the PTI's dissenting members decided to skip the voting process altogether.
174 members have recorded their votes in favour of the resolution. Consequently, the resolution for vote of no confidence against Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, has been passed by a majority of the total membership of the National Assembly.
Now, it was a long day for the parliamentarians. The National Assembly convened at 10:30 a.m. sharp, but between that time and midnight, the lower house was adjourned at least about 4 times. Just minutes before the voting began, the National Assembly Speaker Asad Kaisar, along with the Deputy Speaker, resigned from their posts. Now, Kaisar said that he could not take part in a foreign conspiracy to oust a Prime Minister who had been elected by the people of Pakistan.
मैंने फैसला किया है कि मैं स्पीकर के ओहदे पे मजीद नहीं रह सकता और मैं अपने ओहदे से इस्तीफा देता हूं। मैंने अपनी जिंदगी का बहुत लंबा अरसा अपने लीडर इमरान खान के साथ गुजारा। 26 साल से मैं उसके साथ रहा।
Soon after this, PMLN's Ayaz Sadiq took the chair and then paid a short tribute to Asad Kaisar for making an honourable exit. And at 11:58 p.m, voting on the resolution began. Members in favour of the resolution were asked to exit the gate on the Speaker's left. The session was then adjourned to 4 minutes, and at 12:02 a.m, the session resumed with the recitation of the Holy Quran. All government members except for Ali Muhammad Khan walked out of the House and boycotted the session. And throughout the session, Imran Khan was not present. The nomination papers for the new Prime Minister will have to be submitted by 2 p.m. local time today in Pakistan. That's in another couple of hours from now. Scrutiny will be completed by 3 p.m. and the National Assembly session will convene again at 11 a.m. Monday morning, where a new Premier is scheduled to be elected. What's interesting is that the joint opposition has named PMLN's Shehbaz Sharif as their candidate. He's the younger brother of the 3-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. And the opposition leader is known very little outside Pakistan, but domestically he has a formidable reputation for being a pretty effective administrator. No Pakistani Prime Minister has ever completed his 5-year term, and with Imran Khan, the spell of course continues. He tried to cling on to power even through unconstitutional ways. He had attempted to block the no-confidence trust. He called on the President to dissolve the House. He had even spoken of a conspiracy, a foreign-funded conspiracy that had sought to dislodge him from power. But all efforts, it appears, were pointless, and in cricketing analogy, he was clean bowled by the very people who were once his close allies who deserted him and joined ranks with the opposition. But he seems to have got a lot more to say and do, which is why he's called his supporters to hold nationwide rallies and protests. Imran Khan himself will be present at a demonstration today in Islamabad. To get more updates in terms of what is likely to unfold, we are joined in by senior journalist Imtiaz Gul, who is joining us live on this broadcast. Mr. Gul, let me begin by asking you this. You know, as soon as the voting began in terms of the no-trust motion that was brought against Imran Khan, it was very clear that he was going to be dislodged from the Prime Minister's chair. Shehbaz Sharif, it appears, is the candidate the opposition wants elected as the next Prime Minister. But considering that the PPP and the PMLN effectively came together only to dislodge Imran Khan, do you think the two will now be able to cooperate with each other to run an administration?
I think, given their past acrimonious history, one would assume that all 13 parties join hands for their 174 plus votes just to get rid of Imran Khan, number one, and number two, their agenda most probably will be to go into snap elections whenever possible, whether 3, 4, 5 months down the lane, because any arrangement beyond that time would not suit either of the parties. They both have to carve their way for their own electorate. And the People's Party, for instance, would have to see how much comeback it can stage in the most populous Punjab province. And the PMLN itself would see how much it can expand its influence in Sindh and other provinces. So it's, I think everybody agrees that, almost everybody, that we are heading into snap elections a few months down the lane.
Absolutely indeed. But Imran Khan is definitely not done yet. He's called for a protest rally in Islamabad today that we expect that he would address. What do you think you'd want to tell the people of Pakistan after the big debacle that he suffered?
I think Imran Khan failed to read the very big writing on the wall. The moment the motion of no confidence was moved on March the 8th, it had become clear that the opposition parties had done their homework, and there was a structural background to it. There were triggers which basically necessitated that motion of no confidence and also ensured its success. So also what we saw yesterday, also early morning Sunday, was quite unfortunate, I would say, sad, because Imran had delivered his almost near farewell speech on the 8th of March. Everybody had assumed then that the function of the Parliament would be smooth, but unfortunately it turned out to be a very agonizing day. And I think that is all because Imran Khan was still hanging on to some faint hope. We don't know what he was up to or how he was being advised. That was an extremely ill advice if he was getting from somewhere to hang on. There was no chance of him surviving a vote of no confidence, and particularly when the Supreme Court had ordered so. He also should have, I think, read that he is pitched against an entire array of forces, including the forces of status quo, including his all political rivals, including his former allies who were very deeply entrenched as members of the status quo. So the guy wanted to probably stand out as one person who is pitched against the entire status quo. And eventually he lost. He was told that he had no chance, and that's why. And it was the result of a very late night meeting yesterday on Saturday, following which the Speaker of the National Assembly and his deputy resigned, and then Imran Khan finally surrendered to the situation.
Absolutely indeed. And also, Mr. Gul, you've been looking at Pakistan politics for so long and so closely. Do you think, in the manner in which Imran Khan has conducted himself through this entire process leading up to the no confidence motion where he ended up losing it, do you think he's earned the sympathy of the people of Pakistan where they may want to actually support him in the case of a snap election? Or do you think he's got a very sorry face and people in Pakistan may not have enough faith in him to support him again as their Prime Minister?
Well, I think it has happened on the contrary. He himself, I think, has managed to sell his narrative to the youth in particular, which constitutes more than 60% of the population. His addressees are primarily the younger people and who have accepted his narrative of a conspiracy against him, regardless whether it exists and regardless whether it is externally driven or was motivated by the domestic factors. But the common man, at least the people I have been seeing, the drivers, the vendors, the small kiosk runners, they all are very sympathetic towards Imran Khan. They see him as a victim of a conspiracy. And now the big question is whether he would be allowed to return. I mean, there is no doubt the sympathy for him, support for him has swelled. And it will take some time, obviously, for his followers to recover from the shock that they saw yesterday and early this morning. But there is no doubt that his sympathy, his vote bank will certainly increase. However, whether that translates into an electoral victory, that depends on many factors.
I think that you've put it really well there. And my last question to you, Mr. Gul, is, it's a whole array of opposition parties who've come together. The PMLN has a different agenda. The PPP has a different philosophy. There are far religious leaders, far-right religious leaders who are also a part of this opposition, which has managed to unseat Imran Khan. Can they come up with a common minimum agenda to, in fact, run a country?
Well, there's always possibility of even very disparate, disagreeing parties joining hands for a minimum agenda. And the agenda is most probably the most pressing agenda is economic structural reforms that this country needs to move forward, a country of 220 million people. So nothing should stop these parties from agreeing on bare minimum. Shahbaz Sharif has been talking of a charter of economy. And I think once all parties agree on the Charter of Economy, we would hope that Shahbaz Sharif also takes the PTI on board, despite all the bickering and acrimony that has existed between them. Because right now the country really needs to continue the momentum that Imran Khan's government had generated in the last couple of years, despite the COVID ravages. And we really need to continue that momentum. And there are very clear indicators, economic indicators coming from the State Bank of Pakistan, from the Federal Board of Revenue, Federal Board of Statistics, which suggest that if we were to take a dozen indicators, Imran Khan's government fared very well on 10 of the 12 indicators. Inflation was one big issue that has hit everybody, every country, and the other was current account deficit. That was because of higher imports and the devaluation of the dollar. But otherwise, I think all sincere, well-meaning politicians would find no problem in joining hands to push forward the economic agenda, taking the PTI Imran Khan on board. And this would also reflect the realization that only they survive and thrive only when the country thrives. So one would hope that they all go by this spirit.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Imtiaz Gul, for joining us and getting us all those updates. So it remains to be seen as to what sort of a common minimum agenda the opposition parties, very disparate parties with very different philosophies, actually all managed to come together and form a government we expect. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.